welcome to session 4 of Champion Relationships. You know, we really believe that the Lord has, don't we, Sherry? We really believe that the Lord has great relationship for God's people, right? But relationships don't just happen just because you want them to. Yeah, you have to want them to happen. You have to be intentional about it, just like anything good in life. But there's probably nothing more rewarding than great relationships. And last time, in their last session, we talked about the power of words, and this session we want to focus on the power of listening, which I think is incredibly important. And there are a couple of verses that I wanted to share with the groups, and these will be in your study guides. One is Ephesians chapter 4, verse 29. It says, "Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen." So what you say is important, and if you listen to the right kind of thing, it's important to you as well. And there's a couple other verses I wanted to read to you as well out of Proverbs when it talks about listening. Proverbs chapter 15, verse 31 says this. It says, "He who listens to a life-giving rebuke will be at home among the wise." And then in the same chapter, verse 28, I read verse 31, excuse me, that was Proverbs 15:31. Let me read verse 28. "The heart of the righteous weighs its answer." In other words, you pause and you listen. "The heart of the righteous weighs its answers, but the mouth of the wicked gushes evil." So people talk quickly, but a wise person and the person that walks in the wisdom of the Lord will stop and consider what's being said, which I think is also an important part of listening as well. And one other verse I want to share with you is Proverbs 17:28 says, "Even a fool is thought wise if he keeps silent, and discerning if he holds his tongue." So I think the wisdom and the power of actually listening and considering before we just start talking is really important. Now, we haven't really gotten into the issue of how that affects relationships, and I thought it'd be good for us to share. I know there's a couple things I want to share about how to be a great listener, because it's so critical to relationships. If we don't listen to one another, you're not going to get anywhere. Otherwise, everybody's just talking, you know. So first of all, listening's hard for one reason, because we can listen faster than people typically speak. And I know I can talk pretty fast sometimes. I've been accused of that. But people can still listen way faster than I can talk. So we tend to get naturally bored, you know. So in our attention deficit society, it might be hard to kind of focus and listen. And by nature, we're impatient. Go ahead.
People tend to be thinking about what they're going to say instead of what's being said to them.
Absolutely. And you know, we're primarily interested in ourselves. So listening is actually one of the first things I want to say is listening is really a gift that we give to somebody. You know, it sounds kind of funny because it's so easy and it's completely free. But people want to feel important. You know, as we talked about on our first night together when we kicked off the Champion Relationship Series at the church, we talked about the fact that people really want to feel important. And one of the ways they know if they're important is if they're being listened to. Another thing I want to say too is when you're listening, there's a couple tips, and we've talked about these before. I just want to remind you is that you want to have good eye contact, but beyond kind of the physical things, I think you have to be willing to be influenced, and you have to be willing to want to hear somebody else's viewpoints. One of the things that I try to do, because I can be a good listener. I know sometimes you don't think I am, but I can be a good listener. And one of the things that I try to do is I try to take the perspective that there's something that everybody can teach me, and that I can learn something from everybody. So I find that having the perspective that somebody's viewpoint is interesting, and I want to be willing to be influenced. And then what I think you just touched on a second ago too is you have to turn off your own agenda if you're really going to be listened to. So
on what they're saying.
Why don't you share for a moment what your thought?
Bob, I think there's 3 kinds of listening, and the first one is what I call pretend listening. And people have learned skills so well. You can look somebody in the eye, and I tend to tease you and say that that's the marble eyes, where you look me in the eye and you're looking, but you're really not listening to a word that's being said. So that's pretend listening. I think the second kind of listening is selective listening, where if somebody's talking, you just pick different parts of what they're saying, but you're really not listening to every word. And then the ultimate listening would be the focused, attentive listening. And that's where you're really giving, you know, Scripture uses Lydia in Acts, how she really listened when Paul came. And the word that they used was heed in Greek, and it just meant that she was focused, attentive, just totally there and open. And in listening, if you're not, something that's helpful for me to focus, because I get distracted really easily, is a lot of times I repeat back to you even what you're saying, Bob. And that helps me to not be thinking about what I want to say or interrupt you.
Sorry, I just burped.
I caught that, but I wasn't going to say anything to anybody.
Probably should.
But I was
probably
listening.
hear it on the microphone.
Yeah. So this is really down-to-earth coffee with Bob and Sherry here.
Yeah. Actually, one of the things you touched on, but in our this series really isn't about marriage, but one of the things that has really helped us in our marriage is because both of us primarily want to talk. We want to state our position. But one of the things that has really helped us is when we forced ourselves to slow down and actually restate what we just heard the other person say. And it's kind of frustrating because, you know, I mean, we're not dumb people. I mean, there's a lot of people brighter than us, but to force yourself to slow down. But we found out, I think, in our own life that we weren't really listening. We weren't understanding. Sometimes I'd say what I thought you said, and you said, Bob, that's not it at all.
Exactly. And then the other thing that's helped me is when I say to you, Bob, this is really important. I need you to listen. Because I've heard you say to the men, not so much to me, that sometimes when women tell a story, because it's flowery and we're not bottom line direct to the point, it's like sitting in a doctor's office waiting till you see the doctor. So I know that's helped too, if I can say to you, Bob, please, I need you to listen.
We didn't plan it this way, but that's actually a perfect segue into our next session, which is we're going to be talking about differences. And the most obvious difference in relationship we have is between men and women. We're going to talk about that next time. But tonight, your focus is all about listening, and it's been fun to be with you for a few minutes.
Can I just share a story? I love stories, but there's a story about a young lady and her car broke down, and she tried to get her car started and couldn't get it started. And so there was a man behind her, and it was traffic time, and he just kept laying on the horn, honking at her, yelling at her to move her car. So she was waving at him, go around, and he didn't do that. And finally, she got out of her car, went over to where he was. He rolled his window down, and she said, look, my car won't start. Why don't you let me get in your car, and you can go try to start my car, and I'll take over honking the horn, and you go try to start my car. And I think it's kind of a unique story because it talks about how he just wasn't listening. He was so focused on getting where he wanted to go, even though they don't know each other. But we really do need to be in tune and listen to what people are saying.
All right, next time, next session, differences. You're going to like it.